Good morning and welcome to Together in God, a media ministry of Grace and St. John's Lutheran Churches. We are affiliated with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We are happy to share with you God's message of love and hope. Today's service is being brought to you from St. John's Lutheran Church. The church is located at 1804 Highland Avenue in Eau Claire. Please join us now in worship.
The reading this morning is from Isaiah chapter 58. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, in your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient rooms shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Word of God, word of life, thanks be to God.
Gospel according to Luke, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I don't have any great theological issues to discuss with you today. We're not going to talk about doctrine or Lutheranism or any finer points of Christian tradition or religious observance. I've got nothing to say today about the background or context of this gospel passage I just read. Today, I could not care less about any expert commentaries on the Gospel of Luke. None of those things matters to me right now. Those things will matter to me again. But right now they pale in importance because of what happened the last time this passage came up in the lectionary. I watched my brother say goodbye to our mother in her last hours when he had to leave us and drive back home to preach on this gospel. And in his mind, this story was about Mom. I was not scheduled to preach that Sunday, so I haven't had to revisit this memory until now. And now that I do, I find it amazing how in events like that, God shows us what really matters. As I read this gospel in light of past events, I find that the only thing that matters to me in this story is this woman who is slowly tottering at the edge of a crowd, bent over, unable to stand up straight. She's been this way for 18 years. I don't know her name. I don't know her age. I can't tell you if she had any family or friends. I don't know the cause or exact nature of her disability. I have no information about her financial situation or her status in the community. I have no idea whether she was a sweet, pleasant person who inspired everyone with her brave and cheerful attitude despite her disability, or a bitter, crabby woman trapped under a dark cloud of despair. I don't know how she happened to walk into this place where Jesus was teaching, if she was searching for something or just wandering. None of those things matters to me because they did not matter to Jesus. In this story, the only thing that mattered to him was that at this time and in this place, he found himself in the presence of a child of God, created in God's own image, who had been staggering under this crippling load for 18 years. Jesus was busy at the time of this encounter. His schedule was booked solid. On this morning, he was teaching in the synagogue, trying to get across a life-giving message to a large group of people. Many people had taken time out of their busy schedules to come listen to him. This was a time for teaching. What he was doing required his full attention and concentration. And yet, in the middle of his duties, he got distracted by this woman. It's human nature to be attracted to beauty or grace or poise, an air of success or a magnetic personality. Olympic athletes with their sculptured physiques, confident manner, and radiant looks can turn heads in a crowded room. Fame and status draw our attention. At the New Orleans Churchwide Assembly, you could feel the crackle of electricity when 2011 Nobel Peace Prize winner Lama Gabawi walked into the room. But from what we can tell, there was nothing attractive about the woman in the story. Nothing that would have made a person stop and take notice other than to note in passing how glad they were not to be her. Yet, despite this, she caught Jesus' attention. When he saw her struggling under a long and debilitating burden, she was suddenly the only person who mattered among all the dignitaries and scholars and religious folk in that crowded room. Jesus did not wait to see what she might do, if she would approach him or would request anything from him. He stopped right in the middle of his teaching and called her to come to him. And then he put his hands on her and healed her. He did not ask her to submit to any test of faith. At that moment, the woman's faith didn't matter to him. The only thing that mattered was that she was struggling mightily as she had done for 18 long years. He simply put his hands on her and said, "Woman, you are set free." And she was. Not everyone was pleased with this class time interruption. The leader of the synagogue was especially indignant. There are rules and conventions that any civilized society has to observe. What about obeying God's commandments? What about honoring religious tradition? What about respecting our fathers and mothers who taught us these things? One of the most important rules was that you set aside a day of the week to honor and spend time with God. According to the interpretations and traditions of the elders, this meant no work was to be done on that day. The synagogue leader railed at Jesus for violating this prohibition against work by healing the woman. Now, I find it curious that the act of laying hands on a person was considered work, while teaching a class in the synagogue was not. I can tell you from experience, teaching is not only work, it is hard work. I have laid hands on people during our Monday healing services, and I can tell you teaching is 100 times more demanding than that. So why was it okay for Jesus to teach, but not to put his hands on the woman's shoulder for 2 seconds? I don't know. And again, right now, I don't really care. The point of the story is not that Jesus had little respect for law and tradition. He was an observant Jew. He knew the rules about not working on the Sabbath, strange and inconsistent though we may find them, and he followed those rules. But not this time. What was different about this case? You know, it's entirely possible that when Jesus saw the woman, compassion took over and it slipped his mind for a moment that this was the Sabbath. Or maybe not. Either way, though, at that moment, the only thing that mattered to him was that woman's suffering. It's no accident that this story comes shortly after the story of the Good Samaritan. A story in which some very righteous people left a man to die because of urgent business or because they were afraid or were concerned about religious cleanliness if they got mixed up in this situation. The Good Samaritan was the one in the story who said, "None of that matters right now. There's a person in need, and that's all that matters." I read about a fascinating example of that attitude in the Olympics this week, and I just wish I could have seen it. During one of the early heats of the women's 5,000-meter run, there was congestion in the middle of the pack. Nikki Hamblin of New Zealand was tripped up and fell to the track. Running right behind her, Abby D'Agostino of the United States could not avoid her, and she also fell to the ground. It's happened so often in the Olympics. Someone who's put their heart and soul into years of intense training gets tripped and falls. It's extremely difficult at this level of competition for any runner to recover, to get up and make up the lost ground. Seeing the dreams they have worked so hard to realize slipping away from them in an instant. Fallen athletes are usually stunned, frustrated, and angry, lashing out at their fate and the runners involved in their accident. That didn't happen with these two. Abby saw Nikki lying on her back, temporarily too stunned to move. And suddenly, Nothing else mattered. While every instinct must have been screaming at her to get back in the race before it was too late, she went to Nikki and held out her hand. She helped her rival to her feet, saying, "Come on, this is the Olympics. We need to finish this race." What Abby didn't realize yet was that she herself had been injured in the fall. As the two runners resumed the race, it was Abby who fell to the track in pain. And this time it was Nikki who turned back and went to her. In the midst of this race of a lifetime, a race that should have meant everything, suddenly nothing else mattered. Nikki helped Abby to her feet. Only when she saw that Abby was able to shake it off enough to hobble along did she return and run down the track. When faced with someone hurting, distraught, in pain, nothing else mattered to these two, not even the Olympics. There is something incredibly Christ-like about that. When confronted with the fact that he was breaking the rules, Jesus all but rolled his eyes at the synagogue leader. Here is a woman in pain and suffering. She's been carrying that burden for 18 years. That's what matters right now. Look at your priorities, he said. I know you own animals. When they need water on the Sabbath, do you give it to them or do you make them suffer? Is this woman any less important than your livestock? Do you seriously think I would be doing God's will by ignoring her burden? Well, the synagogue leader invoked one more argument, this one against the woman for violating boundaries. You can come any other day of the week for healing, he fumed. What if we let everyone come in for healing on the Sabbath? Do you think you matter more than other people? You take that route, Sabbath commandment would be ruined. Don't push it, lady. There are two fallacies with that argument. First, the woman did not come to the synagogue to be healed. She just happened to be there. Jesus saw her need and asked her to come over. And secondly, by making an exception to heal her on the Sabbath, Jesus is not saying she has more worth as a person than others. He is saying her pain is what matters right now. And then he does something about it. The synagogue leader sniffs. She doesn't matter more than anyone else, and uses that as a justification for doing nothing. It's easy to judge the synagogue leader harshly for his callousness, but before we do that, we should take a look in the mirror at our attitude today. The black community struggling under a load of grief cried out in pain, "Black lives matter." The pain was answered with a chorus of, "All lives matter." Of course, all lives matter. But this gospel reading shows us that, like the synagogue leader, we are totally missing the point. The point is that someone who is in pain and struggling right now in front of us matters more right now than anyone or anything else. If we had only answered that cry as Jesus did with, "How can we help?" we could have gotten the dialogue on race relations that this country really desperately needs. Instead, we chose to answer as the synagogue leader did, which only has made the problem worse. Jesus saw a woman staggering under a heavy load, bent over for 18 years, and when he saw that, she was the one who mattered at that moment. Jesus calls us to have the same priority. He's saying that when we encounter a person doubled over from years of carrying a difficult burden, whether that is a woman, a man, a child, a prince, or a bum, to remember that all those important roles and duties and plans and projects that we have are not so important in the grand scheme of life. What really matters is relieving those crippling burdens. Perhaps the most exciting thing for me at the ELCA church-wide assembly in New Orleans was the sense that at long last our church is really beginning to understand what matters. This church is moving. Even though we spent time gearing up for the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation next year, we spent very little time and energy talking about the past or about doctrine or about theology. Instead, we were able to focus on those around us. We saw those bent over double with the weight of their burdens, and we realized that right now, this is who matters. These are the people who matters, and that is what we chose to focus on the entire week. I'll give you one small example that illustrates the spirit that flows through our church these days. One day in New Orleans, all the delegates were given lunches in a very nice bag to take as we went our separate ways to engage topics of great concern. The youth and young adults at the convention became aware that there was a community of homeless people several blocks away from the convention center. People who, emotionally if not physically, were doubled over from a long struggle with their burdens. And while there is a lot to do at the assembly, the young folks set that aside for the moment. And they came up with the idea of refilling those lunch bags with food and other items. And then they went as a group to where the homeless were, met them, and distributed those bags. And then they came back to the convention and asked others to refill their bags. And they returned the next day with more aid for those in need. We all encounter in our own families, in our community, in our contacts throughout the world, people who have been living for years, doubled over from the weight of their burdens. Easing those burdens was what mattered to Jesus more than anything else. Every once in a while we come face to face with an experience that reminds us that that is true. Lord Jesus, never let us forget what really matters. Amen.
Bigger than the sea are the waves of God. majesty of the waves of God washing over me, over me.
Thank you for being a part of Together in God, brought to you today by St. John's Lutheran Church. Your prayers and financial support are always deeply appreciated, and the hand of fellowship and ministry is extended to you. St. John's holds services on Sunday mornings at 8:15 and 10:45 a.m., and on Monday evening at 7 p.m. Please tune in again next Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Until we meet again, may God bless you.